In week 10, we were supposed to integrate both games together, the story and the game modes I had made. However, as Mehdi was behind schedule, I decided to do my game testing for this week. I made sure all the gameplay mechanics worked and were bug-free. Whilst I worked on bug fixing, which overall there were hardly any, just a few little movements to colliders and whatnot, I decided to look up at some background audio for my game modes that would make sense. I decided to go for a realistic background noise rather than just plain old music. This would give the player a little break from the music during the story, but also kept the experience immersive for the player. For the target, I used a forest background to let the player know that he was alone after the trial practicing by himself, and as the pictures were near trees and by the park, like seen in some of the background imagery during the story, the sound of the forest seemed the most appropriate to represent this. For the goalkeeper background noise, I found some football ambience of fans in a stadium cheering. This allowed the player to know that he was inside a real-life football match and needed to perform perfectly. In week 11, we finally managed to integrate the game modes to the story. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, however, me and Mehdi had to communicate through Discord. In week 11, we finally managed to integrate the game modes to the story. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, however, me and Mehdi had to communicate through Discord as we were not able to see each other. I was able to help him with all the changes that needed to be made through Discord. But like most things in game development, this brought up some issues. And this was a tedious task to do separated. One issue we had was that some game modes needed copy of scripts but with different variables, which again was a simple but tedious task that consumed so much time. For example, the amount of tries the player has in the keeper game mode depended on the decisions you made early in the story. So we had to have one keeper scene where the player had 3 lives and another where the player had 5 lives. We had to go to my lives management script and copy the switch statement, but making one have 3 cases and the other 5. These tasks were tedious, but thankfully through Discord I was able to do some of the scripts and send them to him while Mehdi did the rest of the scripts. There were also times in which we would sometimes forget to add new scripts we made to the scene. And as the scene was copy and pasted from before, the scripts applied to the scene would still be the old ones. So when we play tested, we would sometimes find ourselves in scenes we didn't intend to be in. We'd be checking the scripts, making sure everything's right, and it was only until we realized that we didn't even change the scripts that was a major problem. The big struggle overall was trying to do this task separated and not together side by side, like we would have been if the pandemic wasn't around. However, once we got it implemented, I was extremely pleased with the product and was happy with how the game went from story to gameplay to story. This time, you could experience a flow of gameplay and the story integrated together perfectly with the gameplay. Week 12, our final week. This was a grueling task because we had so much testing to do and had to keep making sure that the game was perfect in many different aspects. As a team, though, we had to first start by adding audio to the game. Our game had no music, no sound whatsoever. My job in this regard was to add audio to my game scenes and made sure that the music would stop from the story and that the game mode scene music would be played and vice versa. A problem I had was that the forest song I chose would play so quietly in the game, and I only noticed this once we built the game. And due to time constraints, I didn't even have any time to fix this. We then went through the game making sure each choice would go to the correct scene. This was really a grueling task to do by having so many different variations in dialogue and choices. It was very repetitive and boring. However, it needed to be done. We also had to go through the dialogue and spell check the dialogue. This was again a very tedious task, as we had so many different branches of stories and tons of dialogue. And despite luckily, we didn't notice any major mistakes. However, due to time constraints, the dialogue was not checked as extensively as we would have liked or hoped. Therefore, we still don't know if there might be a spelling check or spelling grammar error. Lastly, we decided that it was okay to build the game on Android. And hurrah, the game worked the same on Android just like on PC. This was a monumental success, as we didn't know entirely if it would work and only let this happen because of time constraints. Overall, for me, the game turned out better than I expected, especially with what happened halfway through the development process. I thought that this game was going to be extremely mediocre. But in the way the game flows, the story itself, how immersive it is, and the way we've implemented the game modes in terms of the skill progression and the structure of the game modes, I think the job we have done in terms of game design, our technical ability, and our storytelling was extremely positive in terms of that final outcome.